This week on Jerusalem Dateline, President Obama claims Islamic terrorism isn't rooted in Islam, but Christian and Jewish leaders have a different tale to tell. Plus, we hear from an attorney who is helping terror victims sue the groups that sponsor attacks and the banks who help them. And the brutal Islamic caliphate is rounding up hundreds of Assyrian Christians. Is the future of the Christian community in Syria in danger? Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl, filling in for Chris Mitchell this week. It's an amazing story. Jerusalem's mayor Nir Barkat helped subdue a terrorist who stabbed a religious Jew. The entire episode was caught on a security camera. Here, the terrorist is seen stabbing his victim, who strikes back with a bag. Barkat was driving by at the time. The mayor, who was wearing a white shirt, and his security guard jumped out of the car and tackled the terrorist, who dropped his knife when the guard drew his gun. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told CBN News that Barkat displayed true courage.
I thought the mayor showed exemplary courage. He and his bodyguard assaulted the terrorist, prevented more injuries. Societies terrorized by terror need to show different kind of courage. They need the courage of governments who will fight terrorism and not knuckle under it, but they also need the courage of individuals to fight terrorism whenever that is required, and I think we saw an example of that yesterday.
This is the latest in a series of so-called lone wolf terror attacks against Jews, mostly in Jerusalem, but also in other areas. At a Washington conference on extremism last week, President Obama claimed the world's terror threats were not rooted in Islam. But at another conference in Colorado, Christians and Jews heard a different message: to stand firm in the face of growing persecution and violence. John Waggy has more.
The president sees the terrorist threat as a law enforcement problem, a battle with difficult rogues of all faiths, not a civilizational war.
The notion that the West is at war with Islam is an ugly lie. And all of us, regardless of our faith, have a responsibility to reject it.
But his remarks come as much of the globe is engulfed in a growing flood of hatred for Jews and persecution of Christians, much of it coming from the Muslim world. That includes terror groups like ISIS, who have founded an Islamic empire, and Iran, whose leaders have preached the extermination of Israel for decades. One Jerusalem pastor, Wayne Hilsden, says Christians and Jewish believers in Jesus must speak up and brace for fierce opposition.
How many of you know that the more hatred comes against the Jewish people, those who stand with them in their time of trouble will also be hated? We will also be slandered. We will also be lied against and falsely accused. It just goes with the package.
At a summit this month in Colorado, Hilsden launched a group called FIRM, the Fellowship of Israel-Related Ministries. The goal is for believers to learn from the book of Daniel, to be aware of the times we're in, and to take a stand, regardless of what it costs, and to do it in love.
This is one of the most intimidating times in history, when the attacks of the enemy can spread like wildfire around the world and never eradicated. And when we are attacked, we will be tempted to attack our accusers in return. But when we stand firm, let us be like Daniel and not return evil for evil. Let's love our enemies.
Messianic Jewish leader Jonathan Bernis says fundamental Islam is the carrier of the new anti-Semitism, and Christians won't be spared in the spiritual battle that is upon us.
I think that the answer for the Muslim world is the same as the answer for the Jewish world, and his name is Yeshua, Jesus.
The leaders say there's a special calling for young people who respond better to support of Israel and the Jews when they understand the character of God's name is at stake.
Because God's covenant endures forever. Because God's covenant is everlasting. Because He's a faithful God. Because the calling and the gifts of God are irrevocable. That's why we stand with Israel.
John Waggy, CBN News.
A U.S. court has found the Palestinian Authority and the Palestine Liberation Organization guilty of killing Americans. A jury in Manhattan ruled both groups carried out terrorist attacks around Jerusalem in the early 2000s that killed 33 people and wounded 450 others, including several Americans. The prosecution proved that many of the terrorists were employed by the Palestinian Authority. The jury awarded the U.S. victims $218 million in damages, but the amount will actually be tripled under the U.S. Anti-Terrorism Act. The PA and PLO plan to appeal the verdict. Nitzana Darshan-Leitner is an attorney who's sued terrorist groups and their backers on behalf of their victims. Recently, Chris Mitchell sat down with her to learn more about this strategy for fighting terrorism.
You said that you felt a responsibility when the Intifada began. How did you feel when the Intifada did begin? And as a lawyer, what did you feel like you needed to do?
We see that Israel is trying to combat terrorism. We see that the government of Israel was trying to take some steps. We saw the IDF trying to take some steps. But in the end of the day, it's not a conventional war. It's not a war against a military, against the army. It's a war against individuals, sometimes cells, sometimes organizations, but lawless organizations. You cannot have a regular war against them. So one of the ways to fight them is go and block their money, is to hurt them financially. And this what governments cannot do. We are private lawyers who represent private clients that have one goal, to bankrupt terrorism, one lawsuit at a time. We have cases against the Palestinian Authority, many of them on behalf of terror victims, but some of them are on behalf of Palestinian undercover agents that helped the security forces and got kidnapped or tortured by the Palestinian Authority. We represent them in Israel in the United States court. We got judgments against the Palestinian Authority. We put liens on their assets. We got restraining orders against them. And we have ongoing war against the Palestinian Authority as long as they support terrorism.
Is it true, there was an article that was just written about you, that you make the terrorists squirm?
You know, in the beginning when we started, people said to us, how can you put the law on the lawless? How can you impose any law on people who don't respect the law? Those terror organizations are living in our world, are living one leg in the terror world, but one leg in the legal world. When they want to wire money, they need to use regular banks. And this is where we catch them.
Was there anything about the Intifada that made you want to get so personally involved?
Just the mere fact that we have, in order to maintain this country, in order to live in this country, we have to take a role. You know, private people build the state of Israel. Private people have to keep it safe.
As somebody who lived through the Intifada, I remember those days very well, and they were not very pleasant.
Horrible, horrible days, scary days. We don't hear about suicide bombings because they were stopped. But until this day, Palestinians are trying to smuggle in explosive vests into Israel. They are trying to shoot people on the roads, and they do it in Judea and Samaria. They do it in the 443 road. They do throw hand grenades and Molotov cocktails. They keep doing it. Thank God the security fence and the security services were able to block these attempts. But there are attempts every single day.
Do you feel like you're on the front lines of the war on terror?
I feel that we have to do anything we can to join the fight against terrorism. We're doing the cases not only on behalf of Jews and Israelis, but also on behalf of other people who have their rights violated by cruel governments. We are fighting terrorism. We have to keep fighting terrorism. Terrorism became a global danger, a global threat to the entire Western world. We, in the end of the day, live in Israel, and we want to make sure that we live safely in our country. We want to ride our buses, we want to shop our malls, we want to sit in our cafes, we want to send our kids to school and to make sure that they are coming back safe. And this is our job, this is our role, this is our obligation. The Torah taught us, "Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa," don't stand idly by your brother's blood. We will not stand idly by our brother's blood. We cannot afford it. The state of Israel cannot afford it, and the Western world cannot afford it.
Up next, Assyrian Christians are on the run from ISIS. What's the future of Christianity in Iraq and Syria? Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. ISIS militants are kidnapping Christians in Syria. The Assyrian Democratic Organization says ISIS raided 33 Assyrian villages, picking up as many as 300 people along the way. Right now, officials can't confirm the exact number of hostages, but humanitarian organizations have confirmed reports that ISIS has been taking the Assyrian Christians from a chain of villages in the past few days. It began as Islamic State militants suffered two major setbacks on the battlefield. Gary Lane has more.
The Iraqi military hailed its important victory this week against the Islamic State. ISIS forces were routed from al-Baghdadi, a city west of Baghdad that they've held since last June. But al-Baghdadi was not the only town of defeat for the ISIS forces. Peshmerga troops in northeastern Syria, known as the YPG, drove Islamic State militants from the Kurdish city of Tal Tamr. But as they retreated, the ISIS jihadists kidnapped at least 90 Assyrian Christians. The men were taken to an undisclosed location, the women to a nearby mountain. Based on their past actions, ISIS may behead the abducted men and use the women as sex slaves. Juliana Tamarazzi is with the Assyrian Philos Project.
These women were sobbing, saying, what is our fault? Why is the West silent? Why is the church not talking about our persecution? And they're questioning the foreign policy of America and also other world powers in Europe, saying, why is it that there's no agenda, there's really nothing that is being done to help the persecuted in the Middle East?
U.S. wake up!
U.S. wake up! ISIS is the Lord!
A group of Egyptian-American Coptics gathered near the White House Tuesday, demanding that the Obama administration do more to protect Egyptian, Syrian, and Iraqi Christians.
The Obama administration didn't make a clear statement that these individuals were killed for their faith. They actually referred to them in their White House statement as Egyptian citizens, and that's very disappointing to the Coptic community.
Brotherhood, ISIS, Boko Haram, I want to take action against them instead of support them.
And Egyptian President al-Sisi is calling for a united Arab military force to combat ISIS. He says Jordan and the United Arab Emirates have already offered to help Egypt on the battlefield.
Joining us via Skype from California is Tom Doyle. He's Vice President of E3 Partners. Tom, you're also the author of the new book, Killing Christians, Living the Faith Where It's Not Safe to Believe. We appreciate you joining us again. And this is disturbing. What have you learned about the abduction this week of those Christians in Syria?
Well, some of our leaders in Syria have family members that were taken. And the latest that we received this morning is that ISIS has announced that they're going to burn 30 villages to the ground. We don't know if they'll follow up on that, but we already know of some killings happening. But we're praying that the church and the world cries out for these lives. It's 100 to 200 that are taken. It's a terrible tragedy.
Why did you write your latest book, Killing Christians? I'm sure the spiritual had a lot to do with it.
I wanted to tell the stories about those that are living in the midst of this danger. I really do think, Gary, some of the people in this book, if Hebrews 11 was being written today, they might be contained in it, standing, serving Christ, sharing the gospel in the midst of ISIS. They're serving Christ faithfully in the front lines, and their lives will inspire you.
Finally, how should we be praying for them? Not only about ISIS, but for the unsaved and also for the saved, the Middle East Christians.
Well, I think Satan is not stupid, and he knows that in the last 10 years, more Muslims have come to faith than in the last 14 centuries of Islam. So he is not only trying to cause global chaos, but he's trying to keep the church, the believers, from bringing the light into this darkness. So we ask first that believers would start praying. Once we start praying, we have heart surgery, we have a change, and God starts to do things in our mind and in our heart for the believers out there and for those that are even unsaved.
Thanks so much. We'll look forward to reading that book, and thanks for joining us again.
Thank you, Gary.
You can see the full interview on our website, cbnnews.com. He calls himself a soldier of Christ, and he's back in Iraq battling ISIS on the front lines. Brett is a 28-year-old U.S. Army Iraq war veteran. He returned to Iraq 6 months ago to join a Christian militia fighting ISIS. For the safety of his family, he's requested that his last name remain unknown. He's involved in a battle near Mosul.
I may not know them before, but they're my people. The Assyrian Christians of this world, they're indigenous to this part of the world. People are hellbent on erasing them in the history. People ask me, why you? I come back and I say, why not? Why just me? Where is everyone else at?
Brett says he has a price on his head, but says his life is in God's hands, and God has equipped him with many tools to fight ISIS. Up next, our exclusive interview with author Joel Rosenberg on the controversy surrounding Benjamin Netanyahu's speech before the U.S. Congress. Welcome back. It's election season in Israel, and one of the most contentious issues has been whether or not Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu should address the U.S. Congress about Iran. We asked Israelis in Jerusalem what they think. Do you think Prime Minister Netanyahu should go to the United States and speak to Congress?
I don't really know all the details about it, but I don't see a reason why not. I think if he thinks so, it will be good to Israel. So I believe he knows what he do. I mean, he's doing his best to try keep everyone's calm. I mean, it's very hard to live here. It's very hard to be our prime minister.
I think he shouldn't, because it's election time. Election's coming soon, and I think it's a political move.
It might be a good idea at the beginning, but now with all the development and people around in the States, if he's a responsible person, he shouldn't do that.
Do you think Prime Minister Netanyahu should go to the United States and speak?
Absolutely, should go.
We left America because we knew Obama was not, from the beginning, for Israel.
I think he has the right to do that, and I don't know why they do make such a big story about that. I don't get it.
What do you think about the state of Israeli-U.S. relations right now?
I think it's the most important thing to keep it calm, because we're friends.
The relationship now between Israel and America has never been such bad, you know. Since Obama and since Netanyahu, it's not a love story, and the more it goes, the more it gets down, you know.
I think it was good, but I think President Obama, since he came, and Netanyahu, and they disagreed about a lot of subjects, and that shaken a little bit the political friendship between the two countries, which was really strong until then.
We have a lot of similarities in our beliefs and in the freedom in our country and democracy, and I think that the connection is very strong.
The controversy over Netanyahu's speech is creating an uproar on both sides of the Atlantic. CBN News spoke with author and Middle East analyst Joel Rosenberg for his analysis.
Joel, has a big speech coming up in just a few days. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu goes to Congress. What are your thoughts as just a few days before his speech?
Well, first of all, we're watching a train wreck in U.S.-Israeli relationship. This is as bad as I've ever seen it. There's certainly been tense moments before, but you almost get the feeling that the President of the United States is ready to ditch the relationship. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, one person said to me the other day, it's like we're watching a divorce. That's how bad it is. What is the Prime Minister going to say that the President is so angry about? It's stunning.
Yeah, what's lost in a lot of this is the fact that he wants to speak about Iran. Right. And right now the administration's negotiating with Iran. How serious is the threat? I mean, has that been diminished by the controversy about the whole idea about the speech itself?
Well, look, I think at the core of, if you ask the question, why is the President being so, personally hostile? Mm-hmm. I think where we are is the President wants this deal to go through, and Prime Minister Netanyahu is probably the only person on the planet that has the standing to persuade people to be against it.
With the relationship as strained as you say it is, what does that mean for America?
Well, look, the President's making a very dangerous mistake in terms of misunderstanding the nature and threat of the evil we face. I mean, I think the biggest challenge right now is not that the U.S.-Israeli relationship on a day-to-day tactical level will grind down, but when you're not talking to leaders and you're in a hot war with radical Islam, to have disconnect, have daylight between the United States and Israel could invite attack against Israel, and I mean, the president, I think, is really miscalculating here. He doesn't see that Iran is not just radical Islam. This is apocalyptic Islam. I'm not comfortable with these two not being able to talk to each other.
Yeah, if we're in this kind of age, this apocalyptic Islam, how should people be preparing? How should people react to the speech as well? I know you have some ideas about that.
Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu has his first interview with the Atlantic magazine, as it turns out, in 2009, when he was about to be sworn in. He warned of an apocalyptic, genocidal, messianic death cult running the country of Iran. He understands it. Right. Look, I think he will lay out I assume, a very compelling case for why no deal should be made with Iran. Do not allow Iran to legitimately and legally enrich uranium. But the president seems to believe that Iran should be allowed to have 6,500 or so centrifuges to be able to continue to enrich uranium, even though in 2006 a UN resolution declared it illegal. But this would make it legal, this new deal, if it goes through. And that is a clash of visions, a clash of policies like we've never seen between the United States and Israel before. And I have to say, as an American-Israeli dual citizen, it's painful to watch these two leaders be so dysfunctional. And I'm just praying that the Lord would heal that.
Joel, great to be with you again.
Great to be with you, Chris. Thank you so much.
When we come back, Jerusalem Dateline receives high honors from national religious broadcasters in the United States. Welcome back. This week, the NRB, the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, awarded Jerusalem Dateline with its 2014 award for Best Creative Television Programming. CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief and Jerusalem Dateline host Chris Mitchell accepted the award and told the audience what makes Jerusalem Dateline unique.
We like to tell a side of Israel that many in the media don't tell. We tell a story about Israel that is a light to the nations, that through its archaeological discoveries is affirming ancient Israel and modern Israel, which is through technological breakthroughs, medical marvels, is really a light to the nations. And it's a light to the nations, many of the nations that are surrounded by enemies that want to destroy it, and yet it keeps plodding along. And so we like to tell that story.
That's it for this edition. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next week on Jerusalem Dateline.